November 1st. St. Paul's Cathedral in London is filled with hundreds of candles dancing against the Gothic windows. The organ resonates through the naves as a royal procession advances down the central aisle. But this is no ordinary ceremony. It is the wedding of a 6-year-old child. Isabel of France, Europe's youngest princess, walks toward the altar where Richard II, King of England, a 30-year-old man, awaits her. Dressed in golden silks that drag across the stone floor, the little girl can barely carry the weight of her tiny crown. In a few minutes, she will be declared Queen of England, sealing a political alliance that will change the destiny of 2 nations. But how did such a young child become the centerpiece of medieval diplomacy at its most brutal? To understand Isabel's tragic fate, we must return to 14th century France, when the kingdom lived under the shadow of royal madness. Isabel was born on November 9, 1389, at the Louvre Palace, daughter of Charles VI of France and Isabel of Bavaria. She was the royal couple's 4th daughter, a princess born in dark times that would mark her entire existence. Her father, Charles VI, was known as Charles the Mad, due to episodes of insanity that had afflicted him since age 20. During his crises, the king would not recognize his wife or children, believed he was made of glass and would shatter if anyone touched him, or would flee through the palace corridors screaming that invisible enemies were pursuing him. France lived plunged in chaos, governed by regents who fought for power while the true king remained imprisoned in his own mind. Isabel's mother, Isabel of Bavaria, was an equally controversial figure. Ambitious and unscrupulous, she took advantage of her husband's illness to accumulate power and wealth. The chroniclers of the time described her as a dissolute woman who kept lovers while neglecting her children. For Isabel of Bavaria, her daughters were valuable commodities in the European political game, destined to seal alliances through arranged marriages. In 1396, when Isabel was only 6 years old, a diplomatic opportunity arose that would change her destiny forever. Richard II of England, after years of war against France, sought peace to consolidate his internal power. He had lost his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, and needed a new matrimonial alliance that would bring political and financial stability. The French councillors, led by the Duke of Berry, saw in the English request a golden opportunity. They proposed the marriage between Isabel and Richard, offering a gigantic dowry of £800,000 and a 28-year truce. For France, bankrupted by war, it was an irrefutable opportunity to buy peace with the sacrifice of a child. Some English councillors argued it would be better to wait until she turned 12, an age considered suitable for consummating matrimony. But Richard II was desperate. He faced internal rebellions, devastating financial problems, and the constant threat of deposition. French money and external peace were more important than considerations about the bride's age. In October 1396, the terms were finally settled. Isabel of France would be delivered to England as a political gift, a child sacrificed on the altar of royal diplomacy. Isabel's farewell from the French family was a spectacle carefully orchestrated to impress the English ambassadors. At the Louvre Palace, Charles VI, in one of his moments of lucidity, blessed his little daughter with tears in his eyes. Isabel of Bavaria, on the other hand, demonstrated her habitual coldness, treating the separation as a successful business deal. Little Isabel did not fully understand what was happening. The journey from Calais to London lasted several weeks. She took with her only a few toys, her favourite dolls, and a small pet dog that had kept her company at the Louvre. The French retinue that accompanied her included hundreds of nobles, servants, and a special guard destined to protect the treasure being transported. In London, Richard II prepared a wedding that would rival any royal ceremony of the era. St. Paul's Cathedral was decorated with French and English fabrics intertwined, symbolizing the union of the 2 kingdoms. Thousands of candles imported from France illuminated the environment, while choirs sang in Latin and French. It was a spectacle designed not only to impress subjects, but to demonstrate to the world that England had achieved peace through diplomacy. During the ceremony, Isabel remained silent, clearly intimidated by the grandeur of the event. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to kneel to place the ring on her tiny finger while she looked around, seeking familiar faces that were no longer there. When declared Queen of England, she showed no joy, only confusion and growing fear. Isabel's life at the English court was initially protected by the circumstances of her age. Richard II, to his credit, treated her more like a daughter than a wife, providing French tutors, allowing her to maintain her native customs and ensuring she was raised with royal dignity. Isabel received her own apartments at Westminster Palace, a manor house, and servants devoted exclusively to her well-being. But the child queen's happiness was brutally interrupted in September 1399. Richard II, facing a rebellion led by Henry Bolingbroke, was deposed and subsequently murdered at Pontefract Castle. Isabel, at 10 years old, became a widow without ever having been truly a wife. Richard's death created a political dilemma for the English. Isabel was a legitimate queen, but her marriage had never been consummated, and she had no heirs. Worse still, the £800,000 of dowry had already been spent, and returning her to France would mean also returning money that no longer existed. Henry IV, the new English king, initially tried to keep Isabel as a golden prisoner, hoping to use her in future negotiations with France. The young widow was kept in comfortable captivity at Havering Castle, where she spent years fighting for her own freedom. Her desperate letters to French relatives reveal a girl who had matured prematurely through suffering. "I write to you in tears," said one of her letters to her father, "for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return." Her pleas finally touched Charles VI's heart, who, in one of his moments of lucidity, categorically demanded his daughter's return. In 1401, after long diplomatic negotiations, Isabel finally returned to France. But the girl who had left Paris at 6 had transformed into a 12-year-old prematurely aged by traumatic experiences. The return to the Louvre did not bring the expected happiness. France continued plunged in chaos, and her family received her more as a political inconvenience than as a beloved daughter. Isabel's tragedy, however, was far from over. In 1406, at 17, she was again used as political currency when her mother arranged her second marriage to Charles of Orleans, a young French poet and nobleman. This time, however, Isabel achieved something that had been denied her in childhood, a marriage based on mutual affection. Charles of Orleans was sensitive, intellectual, and genuinely in love with Isabel. The couple found happiness in arts, poetry, and a love that flourished despite the political circumstances of their union. Isabel finally experienced what it was to be loved for herself, not for her value as a negotiating piece, but happiness was short-lived. In 1408, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and spent 25 years as a prisoner in England. Isabel, again a widow in practice, returned to solitude and dependence on the French royal family. Life had stolen from her twice the possibility of loving and being loved. In 1409, Isabel gave birth to her only daughter, Joan of Orleans, a child who would grow up without knowing her father. Motherhood brought her some consolation, but also the bitter irony of knowing that her own daughter would probably face the same destiny, being used as a political instrument in arranged marriages. Isabel of France died in 1409 at 20 years old from postpartum complications. Her life had been entirely dominated by others' political needs. Sacrificed at 6 in a diplomatic marriage, widowed at 10, imprisoned at 10, married again at 17 for political convenience, and a practical widow at 20 when her second husband was captured. Her death passed almost unnoticed by the chroniclers of the time, a striking contrast to the pomp that had surrounded her first wedding. Isabel of France had fulfilled her role as a political piece, generating an heir and sealing alliances, but never had the opportunity to live for herself. Isabel's story raises profound questions about the role of women in medieval politics and the human price of royal diplomacy. Her experience illustrates how children, especially girls of nobility, were treated as transferable properties between kingdoms, their lives entirely subordinated to the political interests of their parents and husbands. More than 600 years later, Isabel of France's tragedy continues to resonate as a somber reminder of the horrors of child marriage and the objectification of children for political purposes. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how entire societies can normalize the sacrifice of innocence in the name of greater interests. The girl who became queen at 6 paid the supreme price for peace between France and England, her own happiness, and ultimately, her life.